Now to introduce our speaker is Club Vice President for Programs, David Fain, with a classification of insurance. A little background on David. He grew up in Rhode Island. He, as I am, is a son of a Rotarian. He, as I did, chose to put down roots in the Seattle area to raise his family. Welcome back to the podium, David.
Good afternoon, Rotarians. Andrea Driessen has dedicated her career to helping people and organizations become more effective and capable. As a hospice volunteer, Andrea understands the profound power of open and caring communication between those who are dying and their loved ones. Through it all, she's witnessed the life-changing effects that writing what she calls grace notes has on anyone. In her TED Talk, which is the focus of our time together today, went viral on its first day. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you, David. Every Wednesday at noon, our family knew exactly where our dad was. He was at Rotary. My dad was a Rotarian for over 50 years, so it is a beautiful full circle rotation of that Rotary wheel to be with you today on the first Wednesday of the year around noon to share a message that my dear dad's life helped inspire. I am very grateful to be here today in 3 dimensions for a change, along with everyone who's joining on Zoom. Speaking of gratitude, I'd like you to think for a moment about a thank you card you've received in the past that's especially meaningful to you. Let the feeling of receiving that wash over you. What if, in addition to sending thank you cards, we also sent one another cards that told one another how we're impacting the world, much like Michael's tribute, that we have a life worth living while we're still here? What if these notes showed people not just that they matter, but how they matter? My dad was exceptional about noticing how others showed up. So exceptional that I told his story from the TEDx stage, and it launched a movement. In that talk, I asked a fundamental question. Why are eulogies only for dead people? Why do we wait so long to recognize each other's gifts? Why are the truest compliments and the sincerest sentiments said about people we love when they can't hear and savor and relish them? And how do we honor all those around us who are very much alive? I ended up writing my dad what I called at the time a living eulogy, and I described all the ways I saw him contributing to the world, and he got to read it long before he died. I have since, as David mentioned, I call these grace notes, and the world is listening, especially a world that's mirrored in a 2-year-old pandemic, especially a world where we get these daily reminders of how quickly life can change and fade. Grace notes are this tangible, human-centered way to tap a repeatable tool for connection and love. They help us make meaning from disillusionment. They boost our sense of gratitude, which is shown to boost our resiliency. And I don't know about you, but I need all the resiliency I can get these days. They allow us to build team cohesion at work and in our families. And they even allow us to explore what our legacies can become. So with all this goodness, we just know this is true deep down. What do you think keeps us from gracing each other this way? I've polled hundreds and hundreds of people in my live workshops, and there tend to be 4 main reasons. The most commonly cited reason is a fear of feeling awkward. The second is a lack of time, or you could also lump it in with a lack of emotional bandwidth. Finally, some people say they're not sure what to say. Now, all those reasons are valid, and they're all surmountable. So let's look at them head on. I'll give you a roadmap for each one. When you aim to write your grace note, and we're going to lay some groundwork for that today, and you feel that sense of awkwardness, first of all, remember, you're not trying to be a Sufi poet. You're not probably trying to be the next Shakespeare. You're probably not trying to get a job at Hallmark. You just want to sound like you. And there's no way in the world you can do it wrong. It's impossible. This reminds me of a quote by the wise Seattle Rotarian Jane Tornator, who said, "Kindness doesn't demand perfection. Kindness doesn't demand perfection." I once wrote a grace note on the back of a used envelope, and it had a profound impact on the recipient. You can free write, just let your ideas out on the page. Do your best to put that inner editor on the back burner. This is a grace note, it's not a grace dissertation. You can imagine what it would feel like if you got a grace note, and that might put you just in the right frame of mind. There was a study done where they asked people to predict their expected level of happiness if they wrote such a note. They gave them a scale of 1 to 5. People, with a 5 being ecstatic. Most people said, probably a 3 is what I would imagine would happen. And then they went ahead and wrote the note. And they rated themselves a 4 to a 5. So we underestimate the impact this will make on us as the giver, not to mention on the receiver. You can find a buddy to talk through your grace note, and then you're not facing a blank page, you're having more of a conversation, and we're gonna do that in just a moment. And this last recommendation I have, if you feel that awkwardness, this is especially useful if you are called to write a grace note to say someone with whom you're estranged, but you feel a little stuck. So what I recommend, and it might sound a little counterintuitive, is to go ahead and write that draft of a note and send it through the snail mail to yourself. This does a couple of things. First of all, some time passes, mail takes a while, you have a slightly different set of eyes, a slightly different perspective when you get that note in the mail. You also end up with this felt sense of what it's like to hold that note in your hand as if you were the receiver. And altogether, you just may feel inspired to go ahead and mail that note to the intended recipient. I would also say that for any one of us at any given time, it's possible that the most important and compelling grace note for us to write is one we write to ourselves. Can we give ourselves some grace? Can we give ourselves what Elizabeth Gilbert refers to as a cloak of mercy? It's a beautiful image, a cloak of mercy. So for those of you who struggle with lack of time and, shall we say, a lack of emotional bandwidth, I get it, man, life is super busy between work and family and Rotary and friends and dealing with our health challenges these days. We have a full life. And so a couple of ways we can navigate this and still find time. We also all have habits, and there's no judgment here. Maybe for any one of us, it's watching a certain series of shows, or maybe it's social media, or maybe it's making a particular kind of meal. None of those is bad in and of itself, but maybe just one time with one habit, you free up 20 or 30 minutes when you commit to writing a grace note, or you take a walk with a notebook. That might be all it is to free up your thoughts. The other idea, and it's directly related to the first, we're all here on Zoom and in person because we had a meeting request on our calendar. It's noonish on Wednesday, it's time for Rotary. So could you make a meeting request with yourself to write a grace note? Make that commitment. Plus, I think just sometimes when we carve out quietude, true quietude, we can more readily think our thoughts, feel our feelings, and move through them, get past that discomfort that might be keeping us from doing things that are important to us. This all reminds me of how in one of my workshops an attendee said, you know, we like to view procrastination often as a, I had another slide there, making the task monumental, but in the case of grace notes, it's not the task that's monumental, it's the impact. I think that is a true summary of what can happen when you carve out 20 or 30 minutes. Finally here, if writing's not your thing, that's fine. What if you made a video or a photo collage or a word cloud? Maybe you are masterful with PowerPoint decks. Could you write a grace sentence? The medium doesn't matter. What matters is the doing. So speaking of doing, we're going to get our grace note on here for just a few minutes. Here's how this is going to go. For those of you in person, you'll see on your tables some paper and pens, and you'll find someone to pair up with. For those of you on Zoom, you're going to be broken out into pairs by the very adept and virtual Caroline. So you'll each get 3 minutes, and what you're going to do is tell your partner the name of the person you'd like to grace and a few words about how they make an impact on you. And then your partner will take notes. And then you'll switch. And I'll give you a heads up when we're about 3 minutes in so you can switch. For those of you online, it'll be a little different. You will, first of all, exchange cell phone numbers, okay? You're going to exchange cell phone numbers. And then you'll, just as the people here in person, you'll share a few words about the name of the person you'd like to grace and how they impact you. Oh, excuse me. And then, like those of us in person, you'll switch at the 3-minute mark. Are there any questions on how that will go? Okay, any questions? So what we'll do is you're going to just share with your partner the name of the person you'd like to grace and tell them how they impact you, and your partner will take notes, and at 3 minutes into it, you'll switch. For those of you online, you're welcome to make a note in the chat. We'd love to see, and so would your fellow virtual attendees, see what that experience was like for you. Feel free to share in the comments, in the chat online, how that went for you and how you engaged with your buddy. For everyone, I'd love to see a thumbs up as to who ever played the game Mad Libs. Yeah, the fun fill-in-the-blank word game. Maybe you played it in middle school. Maybe you still play Mad Libs. So with a little bit of Mad Libs style, we get an easy-to-use Gracenotes roadmap. Here are 20 writing prompts inspired by Mad Libs that give you a roadmap, a framework through which you can, at any time, write a grace note with an easy-to-use fill-in-the-blank question. Or maybe these will inspire you to write a prompt of your own. You can use one or more to create a theme around your grace note. You're welcome to take a picture of this screen, and you will also, during the Q&A, I'll have a slide up through which you can find a link to download a PDF of this slide. So as I've said, another way to refer to grace notes is that they're eulogies for the living. Now, I sincerely hope that you don't know anyone who's actively dying. But given the times we're in, I realize that may not be the case. No matter what, I encourage you to just look around. People everywhere are dying to be seen and heard, to know how they matter. They're dying to get your grace note. Thank you. We're going to move into questions. As for the folks online, I think your Rotary experience will end right here. Thank you for being here.
Questions? Who wants to catch the microphone? Okay. Well, here's. Hey, Jim, you're looking good.
You just started to hit on something I was going to ask about. Somebody who's dying. I have a very good friend who's got a serious illness. I don't know how to write to that person. Can you maybe expand a little bit on your thoughts on how you do that?
I think it's a great question, and I think it's hard to extrapolate a general comment about that because I don't know the person, but what I find useful for me is when I think about a person I want to grace, I look for you could call it a red thread or a theme that I've noticed about them. So for example, my dad, he was in his 80s when I wrote him the note, and for him, the thing that I lit on was he was a builder, both metaphorical and literal. And so with that word building, I came up with a construct through which I could write the note and make it meaningful. So I find that to be, I just wrote a grace note for a girlfriend over the holidays, and I sat with who she is, how she shows up in the world, and what I got was this idea of her being a Renaissance woman. And so I used my computer, I had this fun Renaissance type, but I also looked for just all the different ways that she was both an artisan and a scientist. And I simply wrote a list of the ways I saw her showing up in those ways. So I think we all show up with patterns. And so I would look for the pattern and then allow that to guide you. And there's, again, no way you can do it wrong.
Okay.
Is that useful?
Okay. Okay.
In the introduction, I heard a reference to some work you've done with hospice.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if working with hospice has informed any of the activity, or if there are any things you learned from that you could share with us.
Oh, I might start getting teary about that one. So much. I learned how to live. I learned that we all die in a similar way in terms of, and they do research on this, that when they study people who are near the end of their days, there are common patterns that occur, that people tend to want to know that they're loved and that they've loved well. It's almost as simple as that. And so our ability to make sure that those, we never know when that last day or the last days are, but I think part of the journey I'm on and that I try to communicate in my talks here is that, number one, we don't know when those last days will be, but also we just want to know that we have mattered. It's so simple. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea, for sharing grace notes with us. Things that I personally am taking away. The importance of how to share gratitude in writing, compassionate communication, and the charge to be inspired to write a grace note by the end of the week. Relationships are really the key to long-term trust and collaboration in a community, and Rotarians inspire hope in our communities. Andrea, in recognition of your generosity at time with Seattle 4, we've contributed to Harvest Against Hunger, a Rotary District 5030 project, as well as a nonprofit which provides healthy meal components to regional food banks. 600 servings of fresh produce have been given in your name.